Unique people leading unique lives shape and inform Iowa City. This community is enhanced by these women and men who live in our midst, working, teaching, creating. Welcome to a series of conversations with people who have stories to tell. Join my guests and me, Ellen Buchanan, in a series of interviews called One of a Kind. Susan Craig is the well-respected and successful director of the Iowa City Public Library. For the past 10 years, Susan has been a leader and a witness to the many important changes in our library. For decades, libraries have been an integral and important part of her story, beginning at a very, very early age, checking out books, at 14 shelving books at the Waterloo Public Library, and then for the past 29 years working in various capacities at the Iowa City Public Library. She has served as reference librarian, head of technical services, assistant director, and then director. According to Lolly Eggers, the former director, and I quote, "Craig is a person whose ideas and service help build the library's reputation for excellence. Susan Craig is active on the state level in the Iowa Library Association. In 2005, she's a candidate for the state president. She's currently as Iowa's representative to the American Library Association and serves on the Iowa Executive Board. For 2 years, she co-chaired the All Iowa Read Committee. In 1990-91, she was a member of the inaugural class of the Iowa City Chamber of Commerce Leadership Program and served as chair of the committee that directed the program in 1993-94. She was the founding chair of the Johnson County Community Network, JCCN. A graduate of the University of Iowa with a degree in political science and history, Susan entered university's library school in 1975. Now, in her spare time, which I can't believe she has any, but her interests include gardening, Project Green, cooking, and her family. There are 3 Craig children, Matt, Nick, and Ann. Welcome, Susan, to One of a Kind.
Thank you for asking me, Ellen.
I know your story begins in September in 1952 in Waterloo, Iowa. Tell me a bit about your first family and how it shaped you. I know your father was an immigrant and you had there were 4 in your family, children, and you had very, very little money.
That's correct. My father immigrated to this country. He was born in 1901, so we were his second family. He had been previously married, but there were no children from that marriage, and his wife died. And he married my mother, who was 27 years younger than he was. And he was in the restaurant business. He was a cook. In the era when you cooked, everyone went to nightclubs. And so he cooked like for country clubs and nightclub kind of places. He had Sunday and Monday off and worked sort of second shift, Tuesday through Saturday. And my mother did not work much outside the home. I mean, it was an era, I think, when women did not, and was very busy because I had my 2 older brothers and we were born in the span of 25 months. So my 2 brothers aren't quite a year apart, and 13 months later I was born. And then 9 years later I had a sister was born. So those were the children in our family. We did not have much money. We lived on the 4 kids and 2 adults on a cook's salary.
And your mother was a waitress, isn't that how they met?
That's how they met. She was a waitress in the restaurant where he was the cook, and that's how they met. My mother is sort of my library inspiration. She always was believed in reading and education. I think she was always disappointed that she did not have the funds. She went to 1 year to let's see, it was called State Teachers College, which was what UNI was called before it was the University of Northern Iowa.
So she got to go 1 year.
She got to go 1 year. And she was in high school during World War II, and I think, got to do some things then because the boys were all off to war. She was the first female member of the jazz band in high school.
She was.
She played the saxophone. And unfortunately, her musical talent passed me totally by. I got the negative part that I have of musical ability, I think, came from my father, who couldn't carry a tune either.
So I read in the research that it was a little difficult for you being where you were in the birth order. You ended up having to take care of your younger sister because of illness of your mother.
That's right. I was 9 years older than my sister, and it was shortly after my sister's birth that my mother started going through a long period of illness, and I was very much a mother figure to her, I think. Not necessarily a mother, a caregiver, and did a lot of babysitting, and I always say I must have one hip higher than the other because I remember hauling her around a lot. But the good things, she and I have a wonderful relationship to this day, and I learned a lot about babysitting and childcare, and when you're a teenager and you need to babysit to make money, I remember, I don't know, I couldn't have been much more than 13, and I used to babysit the family next door, which had like 5 kids in it. So it was just like, well, that's what you did.
Second nature.
Right.
Well, it must have shaped you a bit, though, to kind of take charge, to have that responsibility at such a young age.
Well, I think
for your
yes,
sister.
To be responsible, yes, and I think people who grow up in a home that is, we were not poverty-stricken. We had food to eat and a house to live in and clothes to wear, but money was always an issue. If the television broke, we didn't have a television until, some windfall came along
and no health insurance.
No health insurance. The telephone would come and go. So the car, things like that. They would, they'd be there one day and then they'd be broken, and you'd have to wait until you saved enough money because there weren't things like credit cards and yeah.
And you had down the street, close to you, a grandmother that was very important in your story.
I was very attached to my grandmother, who lived 2 blocks away, and I was allowed, probably before I was allowed to walk to the public library, I was allowed to walk down to my grandmother's house. She worked in her home as a beautician and had a room in the back of the house that had been turned into a beauty salon, as they said in those days.
For a little girl.
And so I would go down and just hang out at the beauty salon while she, washed women's hair and rolled it up and, did permanents that smelled so bad.
yeah, you can remember that.
And again, it was an era, I was born in 52, so probably the mid-50s on into the mid-60s, I was doing things like that. And there were women who went to have their hair done once a week, and, things that seemed so odd today.
And beehives.
Yes.
Was that the beehives?
Yeah.
Now, this grandmother, I know we're going to talk a little bit about your love of gardening, but she kind of got you involved. Tell the story about her paying you.
Well, we didn't have much money, and I can remember that if I really, really needed some money, I could go down to Grandma's house, and she would give me a bucket and tell me if I went and filled it with weeds, she would give me a quarter. And so
that's how you earned your spending.
That's how I earned my spending money before I started babysitting all those kids.
Then I want to talk very close. You said beyond your grandmother was this public library. Was it a haven for you?
It was a haven for me. I was a reader. I can't remember when I couldn't read. I just seemed like books were always a part of my life. My father worked evenings, and one of the childhood memories I cherish is my brothers and I, before my sister was born, we would all get in the big bed with my mother, and before bedtime, and she would read aloud to us. And we would jockey because, she'd sit in the middle of the bed, and there would be one side and the other side, and the loser had to be at the foot of the bed and didn't get to see the pictures.
Oh.
But my mother would take us to the library, and it was the East Side branch of the Waterloo Public Library, a Carnegie building, and the children's room was down in the basement, and it had its own entrance. So for many years, I didn't much go into the grown-up
big
part of the
part.
library, but it was a very safe feeling, you know, sort of a cozy feeling, because you went downstairs and you were down in the basement, but there were windows that you could see people walking by, you know, their feet walking by. And I loved the library. I still remember Ms. Kelly was the children's librarian when I was
It's like
there.
remembering your first grade teacher.
Exactly.
Was this the era that you could only take out 2 or 3 books? Unlike now, when the library is so generous, you can leave with a stack of books.
No, we were allowed to take out more, and I can remember in the summertime I would go to the library probably twice a week and get 5 or 6 books each time. And so I was reading, you know, 10, 12 books a week in the summertime. I mean, they were kids' books,
Sure.
so they were, but I think by the time I moved up from the children's room, I had read a good percentage. You know, this was not a small town little library. It was the Waterloo Public Library. There were a lot of books there, but I'd read a lot of them.
And you've had some firsts in your life. You were the first one in your family to go to college.
That's right.
And then I read that you were the first one that was hired by the public library, had a child, left, and then came back. Is that
Yes.
correct? You were the first one?
I tell this story often to people, particularly groups of women, young women, who simply, I don't think they understand how much things have changed in my generation. That when I was hired in 1975, there were many women who were mothers who worked at the library, but they did not take maternity leaves. They came into the workforce after their children hit some stage that they were comfortable returning to work. You know, whether it was kindergarten or junior high, women who had young children simply didn't work at that time. And so to my knowledge, I was the first person to be pregnant, work, have a baby, and a few weeks later come back to work. And that was in 1975.
And I heard, is this true, that you sometimes would bring your baby, would this be Nick?
This would be Matt.
Matt.
He's the oldest.
Okay, Matt, and he would be downstairs in a room in a little box sleeping. That's a great story.
I just had a part-time job then, and I was a library school student. And in fact, my job was filing catalog cards, because you had to have credentials to do that. You know, I was a library school student, so it was okay. And I would bring, so it was a job you could do anytime. And I would bring him to work when I thought he would sleep. I would put him down in a Baker and Taylor box, which is still one of the major distributors that we get our books from here at the
Baker and Taylor box.
Yeah, and I think he gets embarrassed sometimes when he comes in the library and people say, "I remember you used to sleep in a Baker and Taylor box."
That's a great story. Oh, but I wonder if many people who know you know that at one time you thought you might want to be a lawyer.
Yes, I had thought, you know, as kids do, I changed my mind a lot in high school and college about what I wanted to do. And when I first applied to the university, I thought I might be interested in journalism. And my senior year in high school, I was the editor of our school paper. And I thought, what bothered me about it was, to do it right, you had to spend so much time and do research. And I mean, how could you just go talk to someone and write a newspaper article? I couldn't understand how that could happen. And so instead of journalism, I went to my next favorite topic, which was history and political science. And from the beginning, when I chose that major, I knew you didn't get far with history and political science unless you wanted to be a teacher, which I was not interested in doing. And so I thought I would be a lawyer. And I applied and was admitted to law school in the fall of '74. And I had been married about a year, and we were interested in starting a family. And I thought, I will go to school part-time and have a baby, and that's fine. And the law school did not accept part-time students. And they said, no, you have to come full-time, or you can't be in law school. And I was appalled. It was sort of the Nixon era, and lawyers were not seen as people who were, very ethical. And I thought, well, if they don't want me, fine, I don't want them either. And I'll do something else. What can I do? And I thought about my love of libraries and decided to go to library school instead. And to this day, I have women friends who are on the faculty at the University of Iowa Law School. To this day, you're not allowed to go to law school.
You have to go full-time.
You have to go full-time.
I was just going to ask that. Do you have to go full-time? Well, we're so glad you just decided to go into library science.
Never look back.
Never look back. You started then working at the old Carnegie Library.
Right.
I'm pointing over there. And you had a lot to do with keeping the library on the cutting edge of technology. Where did this come from, this love of technology and knowing kind of what's coming down the road for libraries?
Yeah. Well, I don't see myself, and the staff would laugh that someone would say that I knew a lot about technology, because I'm not real good at it. But I think that I learned from Lolly, who was the director at that time, that you need to be forward thinking, and you need to always be giving people what they want before they even know they want it. And that there are always issues in libraries, because we're a public service, of staff time. And there is never enough staff time to do what needs to be done to serve the public. And in those days, technology was one way that you could manage that. When you think about the old days the way you used to get an overdue, think about it now, it just appears. In the old days, a book was checked out, a numbered slip was put in the pocket of the book. It's like a multi-part form. Everything else was kept in number order. The books came back, the slips got pulled out. They had to be put in numerical order. Then they had to be matched to the ones that you had, and all pulled out for the books that had been returned. So what was left were the things that had not come back, or you didn't get the slip back. Then you had to sit down and type an overdue notice. And then you had to mail it. We would be weeks behind in things like that. So technology was very important to being efficient as a staff, and so we could do the fun parts of library service and in making service better. So that's from the beginning. That's why I've always been interested in technology, because it helps us do our work better.
And weren't there like 3 things that were plugged in 1975 when you started, and they were?
The 3 things that were electric, let alone automated in the library, were the business office. The director's secretary had an electric typewriter. And there was a copy machine. And in the technical services department, they didn't have electric typewriters, but they had an electric eraser. So what you typed on the manual typewriters, if you made a mistake, you could erase, when you had to change a heading in the catalog, and you had to pull, or a call number, and you had to pull a lot of cards and fix them, you could erase those typed numbers with the electric eraser.
Have we come a long, long way?
We have come a long, long way.
And hasn't Iowa City Library, the public library, always been kind of in the forefront of other libraries? We're kind of always been ahead of
I think that
other libraries?
That is a trend that Lolly started, and she deserves the credit for it. We were, there's some debate about were we the first or the second. We know we were the first west of the Mississippi library to have an automated card catalog. And thanks to her vision and forward thinking on that. And once you start something like that, I think you can go 2 ways. You can sort of say, okay, we did that, and now we're going to rest for a while. Or you can continue with that, sort of build it into your institutional culture, which is we want to always be looking for ways to do things better. I think it helps that we're in Iowa City, which is a pretty forward-looking community, and people don't usually disparage new ideas.
Well, I was having fun going through a century of stories, the history of the Iowa City Public Library, written by the former director, Lolly Parker Eggers. And there's a lot of Susan Craig in this, I want to tell you. And I want to, for historical purposes, just chat briefly about the move that you were in charge of when we moved from the Carnegie Library over here. that was such a huge issue to do, and to garner all these volunteers and get all these books putting in place.
Right.
You were the strategist, and I remember reading in this book about Ray Mustin said, well, I had to do some Army work, and the Army could take some lessons from Susan Craig and how she organized this. Just briefly talk about this time, because it was pretty exciting for the community.
Well, I was the organization person. Carol Spaziani did the volunteer effort, and I had to figure out where everything was going to go, by whom, when. And it was very exciting. We had 2 weekends to do it in, and it was wonderful. You know, the weather cooperated, but people were divided into teams, so you were the blue team or the red team, and every team had a different collection they were doing, and they would come out of that old building in a different door, so to try and avoid all the traffic jams. You know, one of the problems over there was no elevators, and so a lot of things had to be carried. We packed the books in beer boxes and put them on dollies, and then different people would wheel them over here, and people would be here waiting to unpack them and put them on the shelves. And people were coming in the front door, coming in the back door.
How did you know how to do this? This is not library work.
Well, but you know, library work, I mean, one of the things that, other than reading, of course, which you can't do and get paid for, at least, you know, not in any job I've ever had, one of the things that attracted to me about libraries is how organized they are, and how you can always, I think libraries attract people who are organized thinkers, and that's one of my strengths. So it was fun.
It was fun.
It was.
In fact, the first day they got done early, and you let them go home
Yes.
early because the next group was coming in
Right,
on
we didn't want to
Sunday.
have everything done, or the people who showed up on
Right.
Sunday wouldn't have anything to do.
Made everybody have a vested interest in this place too.
What people
helped.
don't know is that once it started, I went and hid, because I thought, if this doesn't work, it's going to be such a mess, no one is going to be able to fix it, and I don't want them to find me.
She was hidden someplace. So, all right, let's talk. You've been the director now for 10 years, and now we're going to be up to present time. It's been quite an undertaking for you as the director to get this place expanded. What were the last 10 years, the high point, and what were the low point? Just, you know, a little overview of the last 10 years to get this where we are now in this beautiful building.
Well, you know, looking back on it, sitting here in this beautiful building, I think of all of the work and effort that went in by so many people. You know, the volunteers, the boards, the foundation boards that had to raise money, the library boards who had to plead their cases to the city councils, to the public. I mean, the failed sales tax vote that some felt was, you know, a statement about how we didn't want more library space in Iowa City, which we knew was wrong. And going back and sort of refuting that and saying, you know, doing a survey and saying, no, people do want and need more library space, and what's the best way to get it, and working with all of the interests to come to a solution that would work for everybody. And I think we did it, and we have a beautiful building to show for it.
You're pretty tenacious.
Well, you just, you know,
Had to be
when the
doing this.
need is there, you just can't give up. And if someone says absolutely no, then you figure out a way to give them something that they can say, well, maybe, to. And then you got your foot in the door. And
And how many board presidents did you have during this session till this library got built?
5.
Expansion? 5 of them. Wow. Well, I want to tell you, the buck stops at your desk, Susan, and you did an incredible job, because it's just an absolutely stunning space with lots of room and some little nook and cranny for anyone who comes to the library. Now, let's talk a little bit about your active on the state level of libraries, and you're going to run for president, and if you win, what will your duties be as state president?
well, this is president of the Iowa Library
Right.
Association, which is sort of the trade association for librarians. In Iowa, it's a very interesting group, because it's all types of libraries, and so it's not just public librarians, it's people who work in college and academic libraries and special libraries. And beginning this year, the president's, prior to who's there now, worked very hard to get the school library and media specialists to become part of the Iowa Library Association. They used to have their own association. And so this is the first year that they are full-fledged members in the Iowa Library Association. So the group is getting bigger instead of smaller. And I think, anyone who's ever been involved with a professional association knows that your basic tasks as a president are to, provide the best service you can to the membership, and to be the face of that organization, and an advocate to primarily the politicians, but to any body or person that needs information about what do librarians do in Iowa.
You're the spokesperson for.
Correct.
And how many times do you meet as the statewide state meeting?
There is an annual conference, 2-day, 3-day if you count pre-conferences, in mid-October each year, and that's sort of the big event of the year. And then there are subdivisions of Iowa Library Association. So the small public libraries have a subdivision, the college librarians have a subdivision, and those subgroups often have spring meetings.
I always ask the guests on One of a Kind who or what had a major influence in their lives. I know you spoke about your grandmother and her influence. What else? Who else? Or what else?
Well, I
shaped
think
you?
My mother, who inspired this love of reading and taught me that reading was okay and fun. And Lolly Eggers was a mentor and an inspiration, and if I can do my job half as well as she has done hers, I think I'm doing good. So those people have been major influences on me. The fact that my father was an immigrant, I admire that in people, because I have not moved around much in my life. I grew up in Waterloo, I came to Iowa City to go to school, and here I am. And the courage that it must take to, get in a boat or nowadays on a plane and leave your homeland, and with, hardly any belongings, and maybe not knowing anybody at the other end of the trail, and just saying, I'm going to make a better life for myself, is an inspiration, I think.
Did he talk much about being an immigrant?
He did not talk much about being an immigrant. I think, he was 50 when I was born, and he had come to this country when he was 21. But last summer, my sister, who got involved in our genealogy and started doing some research of the Danish relatives, and she connected with a cousin in Denmark and sent him copies of letters that my mother still had, that he had written, that people had written him from Denmark when the first 10 years or so when he was here. And we had those, he translated them for us. And so we got some insight into his life at that time that he never shared much when he was alive. So that was, it's wonderful to tell stories when people are here to tell them.
I know. So do you know why he left? Why he left Denmark?
For opportunity.
For opportunity. It was financial, or was he not the son who was going to get the property?
Right. There were
what?
six children in his family, and he had a cousin in the States, in Iowa, farming, and he went to he did an internship, I'm not sure if that's the right word, on a big farm in Denmark, and where he was, learning the trade, so to speak, and so.
It just came to me, you said your father was a cook, and I hear from other people that you are a wonderful cook. You got that from your father.
Sure, yeah.
For heaven's sake, somebody went to your house for the library fundraiser, and they're still talking about the risotto you made, and I think you served lamb. They just raved about it. So,
my friend Linda Ostegard and I cooked that meal, and as a fundraiser, and I enjoy cooking, and I enjoy eating good food that people spent time, making it.
And your garden, your garden must be a wonderful place for you to relax and not have to think about all the problems of running a library.
That's right. My garden is my release. Usually each spring I take a week off to sort of pot things up for Project Green and get my garden in shape. And this spring I missed that. I sort of took a day here and there, but I've been donating plants to Project Green for a long time, and a garden is another thing that I just think gives you pleasure just to look at it. So.
Now tell me, I mentioned you have 3 children. What are they doing, and what's happening in their lives?
My son Matt is a graduate with a film degree from the University of Iowa, and shortly after he received that degree, he went to New York City, and he's been there ever since. He lives in Brooklyn. He just turned 29 at the end of August, so I feel old. And he works in the film industry and has done a lot of interesting things. But one of the really nice things Mom likes about his work is that, you know, he'll do a project and work a lot, and then he'll have a lot of time off. So he gets home, you know, more than I think a typical young professional would who has a 2-week vacation or something. So, so I still get to see him, and I get to go to New York City, which I had never been to before he moved there, and visit him, I found out I really like New York City. I don't want to live there, but I like
great place
visiting.
to visit.
Yeah.
Yes.
My next child, Nick, was born in 1980, and Nick is currently working. He sort of went to the food side of the family, and he's worked in restaurants for the last few years. He's worked as a cook and as a bartender and as a wait person.
Okay.
So he likes good food too. And my daughter, Ann Michelle, is a junior at University of Northern Iowa this year and is a graphic design major. So
Wow,
I'm very proud of all of them.
I imagine. Now, I know you're too young to think about beyond libraries, but what would you like to do when you eventually step down as a director? Is there some other area? Would you like to travel, or what would be pulling you?
I think that travel is something that people tend to say, and you know, I would like to travel more than I have in recent years, but I am sort of a homebody. I like to cook. I like my garden. I mean, so I see doing more of that. And one thing I hope to do is spend some time volunteering. You know, my life has been so busy for the last 30 years between raising children and having a pretty demanding job that I haven't been able to give my time back to the community in ways that I would like to. And so that's something I would like to do when I retire.
When you read for pleasure, what does the director of a library like to read? I know, are you a mystery?
I'm a mystery
You're
reader.
a mystery reader.
I'm a mystery reader. Like I just read the new Martha Grimes last
Okay.
weekend, and I couldn't put it down. And you know, the wonderful tension between I want to be done, and then no, I don't want it to be done yet, of a good book. You just can't beat it.
So mysteries, but beyond mysteries.
Beyond mysteries, I read a lot of you know, popular kind of fiction. You know, just a lot of women's authors that I like, and the Master Butcher's Singing Club was a favorite of mine this summer that I read, and I'm on the All Iowa Reads committee still, and so I have to read a lot of books that we are thinking about
Explain for viewers who might be new to the community about the All Iowa Read program.
Well, you know, it's been probably 5, 6, 7 years that communities have started the movement started spreading throughout the country of one community reading one book. In fact, the All Johnson County Reads program is coming up with a kite runner this month, and the Iowa Library Association, in conjunction with the State Library of Iowa. The State Library of Iowa recently established an Iowa Center for the Book, which is a program that is part of the Library of Congress. And they were looking for sort of something to kick off the Iowa Center for the Book that everyone would find out about, that would be fun, that would have a lot of participation. And so they decided that they'd like to do an All Iowa Reads, because, you know, there aren't that many people in Iowa. I mean, we aren't like, I don't know what the size of Chicago is, but the whole state is not that much bigger than the city of Chicago. And I volunteered to work on that. And it's been a lot of fun. I've read a lot of good books, worked with a lot of good people. And I mean, next to reading books, I like to sit around and talk about books. And that was the goal of the project, was to get people to read and talk about a book. I mean, I think it gives people a common language. It's sort of like talking about the weather, only more interesting, because you can't really interpret the weather. Well, did it rain today or not? But a book, you can always say, what did you think about that relationship? What did you think the author was trying to say right there? And, you can talk about it for hours.
We could just talk about libraries for
That's
hours.
right.
Well, Susan, it's been just a treat to have you as a guest on One of a Kind. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Ellen, for all that you've done to support the Iowa City Public Library in all your kinds of ways.
Well, thank you. My guest on One of a Kind has been Susan Craig, Director of the Iowa City Public Library. As a diligent and enthusiastic leader, Susan has guided the library and enhanced its reputation for excellence, service, and innovation. Words used to describe my guest are dedicated, creative, visionary, able to see the big picture, and possessing a great sense of humor. Susan Craig is one of a kind.